So Nathaniel, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Stephen.
It's great to see you. You're coming off a great success in Lincoln Center with the Mall and the Night Visitors. So how was that for you? Was there anything that was a surprise, or was it just all wonderful? Or
It was all wonderful. It's a beautiful piece, and something about doing the same music over and over again. You get to listen to it in a new way. And I feel like hearing the story again and again, I'm keyed to different mythic aspects of it. On the very last show we ended, I played the last note, and I thought, oh, this story ends at the beginning of a journey. How beautiful is that? And a couple performances before that, I had other things that came up to me, like, you know, in the story, the mother has this big transgression, and at the end there's this big miracle. And the way the plot works, the miracle wouldn't be possible without the transgression. So, you know, as we're performing this piece 24 times, things are revealing themselves to me. It was just all joy. It was a beautiful experience. And musically, I mean, Joyce is a fabulous artist, and everybody else in the cast, and Jesse the oboist, I mean, I hope we do it
He's
every year.
amazing. Wow,
He's
I know.
Wonderful.
Astounding,
I hope we
yeah.
have him here.
I hope so too, I have to say. You know, I've always wondered, because I haven't done Broadway and haven't done, usually with the orchestras, I might have 3 performances, so we gear up and gear up. And then by the 3rd performance, honestly, I'm done,
Yeah.
right? And I was just in Broadway the other night thinking this, it astounds me how musicians and actors can gear themselves up for yet another performance. We saw Jonathan Groff, who's amazing in this role, and I think, how does he do that every night? How does he do that twice on Wednesday? I thought of that actually when I was seeing Amal, thinking, how do you keep that energy alive? I guess, is it just the energy of the audience and digging deeper in the piece, or do you go on automatic a little bit?
Well, I think that when there's no question what the next note is, you have an access to a deeper freedom, actually. And if there's only 3 performances of something, I feel like, okay, I have to hold it together, and I don't quite know how my colleagues are going to respond to this moment or that moment. But there's a pleasure in feeling like, oh, well, the crowd is maybe a little more, you know, low-key today, so we're more present to the intimate aspects of the performance. Or, wow, people are really laughing at all the jokes, and, you know, I laugh at things too. I think, oh, I didn't realize that was funny, or I wonder what they did on stage that's different. You know, and of course it's the same show every time, but of course it's different to somebody who really knows it each time. I would also say that I've come to believe that my artistic practice is just don't get bored, because
So that's a mindset.
Absolutely. I play a lot of notes, and there's only so many combinations. So you can get to a place where you think, yeah, tonic, dominant, major, minor, you know, what's the big deal? But there's also a level that goes beyond reason, where the musical stuff, hits you, and it just, like a chord does something in you that's not logical, it's not reasonable. And maybe it's the happiest moment in the piece, but right then, that day, maybe it breaks your heart. So to stay open and to let the music do things to me that I don't understand, that's what makes it good.
Great. Well, we're here today because we want to talk about this new series we're going to inaugurate to celebrate the arrival of this wonderful new instrument here at Shelter Rock. So I had said to you I thought we should celebrate in some way, and you responded without taking a breath, I think, saying we should do a chamber music series. Why a chamber music series?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, there's nothing more fun than playing music together. And I think, you know, there's a lot of amazing musicians in New York, and the musicians that I'm bringing in play with all kinds of fabulous ensembles, orchestras around, but the one thing everyone wants to do is play more chamber music. And I forget who said it, but people like to call chamber music a conversation between friends. And so in playing chamber music, and chamber music means duos or trios, you know, any small ensemble that doesn't take a conductor, basically, to put on stage the sometimes very spontaneous communication non-verbally between musicians, it's an intimate and I think a very human, very beautiful thing to invite people into. And certainly, you know, this is a gorgeous instrument, and I want to invite as many wonderful people to enjoy playing on it with me and with it as possible.
Great, because some people might think, well, it's a solo instrument, can be a solo instrument, and so why not do a program all of big piano pieces? So how, as a pianist and introducing the piano, how is this different from what you would have programmed if we had done just a pure solo
Sure.
program?
Well, spoiler is we're going to have some piano solos too.
Great.
But you know, there's something funny about a really large concert grant because the instrument that now has moved to the social hall was a Steinway Model B. It's a 7-foot piano, also a very lovely instrument. This piano, I think, can play both louder and softer than that piano. There's an incredible thing about a concert instrument, something that's calibrated for music making at the highest level, that you can kind of balance to anything. So I want to show the whole range of what it can do. So Sarah's going to come and do some songs. We're going to do a piano quintet. We'll do one song for soprano, violin, and piano, and then some piano solos. And there's a sort of hidden thread in this concert. I wanted to explore the life of one composer at a time. So this time it's Amy Beach. And Amy Beach was really, I think, the first American composer to be educated here and to make a big splash abroad. She was educated in the States because as a woman at that time, she was not able to take advantage of an education abroad, like so many of her male contemporaries would have been. So what she achieved by essentially teaching herself composition and a little bit of help she had at the piano is really quite extraordinary. I think the piano quintet is on par with quintets of Brahms and Schumann, certainly. I think the songs are fabulous. They were widely performed during her day, and I think the piano music is going to be really fun too. I'm including some works by a teacher of hers, some composers she met, and some composers that she mentored. So I hope that as we explore this piano together, we'll also explore our shared musical history, both in this country and in Europe, where the roots of classical music lie.
So it's interesting when you talk about her education, because from my understanding, is she basically learned from her mother, right? Her mother was a good amateur pianist.
Yes, absolutely.
And that she wanted to further her education, but as a woman, that wasn't really possible. So that she studied scores. And when I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but she married a surgeon who was supportive of her as a performer, kind of, definitely not as a composer. From what I read, he was unhappy if she was composing at home. She could practice, and he supported that, but not the composition. So compositions she did during that period, he died in 1910 when she was 30, because you're right, is my math correct? I'm not sure when they got married.
Well, she was very young. I don't remember exactly how old she was, but there was a lid on her musical development, first from her mother and then from her husband.
Right.
And wild was, yes, she learned from her mother, but there was this parental theory going around that to bring up a child with good morals, you had to keep the thing they wanted most just out of arm's reach. So she really kind of parceled out Amy's time at the piano. So yes, she did teach her, but she didn't right away. And she sort of, she would punish her by withholding the piano, or even, there's a story of her punishing Amy by playing a very lugubrious piece by Charles Griffiths, which I am not going to inflict on this concert. But I mean, it's just another bit of evidence how much music did move her and how incredibly touched she was by music. So yes, her mother helped, but also limited, and her husband helped, but also limited. And one big thing that was super not ladylike was to make money from performances. That Dr. Beach really would not allow. So her performances were kind of restricted to charity events or fundraisers, but she never kept the money from that. In fact, she also was kept from knowing about their financial situation, such that when he died, she realized she was going to have to start performing for money in order to make things work in his absence.
And is it not true that the few compositions that she did and that were public while he was alive were under his name? It was Mrs. H.H.A. Beach,
Yes,
correct? Right? So
absolutely,
it was not under her own name.
That's correct.
She's an interesting choice,
Mm-hmm.
right, to open a concert series with. And when you initially said something, I thought, well, that's an interesting choice. And it made me dig a little further, and now I'm quite intrigued. I know her music. I don't know her music all that well. But what hit me was that she started out clearly very talented. Apparently, at a very young age, she learned to play. She had perfect pitch. She wanted to compose, and she had that impetus. And then to have the barrier of her mother and of her husband. And then finally, once he died, and I make that sound that way, but after he died, the world really opened up in some extraordinary way.
Yeah, that's right.
She was known in Europe. How? How did that happen? She wasn't known here, and that's even when he died, right? Early pieces. Do you know how she got known in Europe?
Well, she was clever, you know. She had a sense of positioning herself in sort of the musical world. So I believe it was Adelina Patti to whom she dedicated one of her big early songs. And there was a violinist, I forget her name, but a violinist that she went around Europe with. So she sort of attached herself.
Now, when was that? Do you know when that was? That after his death?
That was after his death.
Because she couldn't travel at all, right?
That's
while
correct.
he was alive.
That's
right.
correct.
All right.
Yeah, but she was very much enmeshed in the Boston musical scene. And even, I forget, was it Chadwick or Foote or one of those, Boston school, old boys, they called her one of the boys. And
I think that was Chadwick, actually. Yeah.
That was like a good
Yeah,
thing,
a good
I
thing.
guess. Yeah. In fact, speaking of her connections to Europe, she had a big beef with Dvorak because Dvorak, I think, had it out for women composers. He said they shouldn't, be allowed, they didn't have the temperament, blah, blah, blah. And there was a series of newspaper articles back and forth, editorials from each to each. And this was, of course, the Victorian era equivalent of angry tweets. But they were, long, reasoned articles. And they're wonderful to read. And, Mrs. Beach was not, she didn't pull any punches. But also, she didn't make her musical career about what held her back, which I think is so interesting. Because clearly, reading her biography, you see, her mom kept her from the piano, literally kept her from the piano. And her husband kept her from expanding her career. And yet, she never mentioned it. And people asked her at the end of her life, did she believe that she had been held back on account of her gender? And she said no. So I think that's very interesting. I think that her interest was really with the music. And it wasn't so political for her, but she was hugely supportive of other women who composed. So somehow I think she knew that her authority, that her influence, that her support was needed. And that's an aspect of her legacy that I really want to celebrate too.
So let's say her dates again, just so our listeners have a good sense.
Goodness, did you write them down?
No, but if you don't remember, then I'll say them, and if it's wrong, that's the way it is. No, it's 1867, I believe she was born. And 1910 is when her husband died, and she died in 1944. So she had quite a time, and I believe the trio was written in 1937. Okay. I mean, I don't know if you know it, but that's what Siri told me on the way out in the car.
Okay.
I was thinking I should know that date. So that'll be very interesting to see where she is musically at that point, because she had finally had some freedom. This is probably an politically incorrect question. Did you choose her because she's a woman composer? Was that a statement, part of a statement, or was it?
I wish I could say that I was that organized. What happened to me is that I heard a friend play the Beach Quintet, and I was just blown away by it. I thought, this piece, I need to play this piece. And, putting a concert series together or putting a single concert together, it's sort of, I feel this urgency of, okay, if I only get to do one more, what do I want to do, And this was the piece that was just urgent in me right now. I need to play this fabulous quintet. And from there, I thought, well, I don't know much about this person, and yet she blew me away with this one piece, so let me research her. I wanted to know more about her because of that. I would say it certainly might be a reason I don't know much about her, that she is a woman composer. I think we learn less about women composers in school, although that's beginning to change. I would say it was equally interesting to me, though, that she was a composer-performer, because that combination is something that really has been kind of leaving our tradition, you know? There are some notable exceptions in our time, like Conrad Tao, Timo Andres, you know, some Jesse Montgomery, string player, some people who are both performing and composing. But there was a thing that happened where music composition got really cerebral, and it kind of divorced itself from the felt reality of, you know, being there at the keyboard or being there with other musicians making it happen. And Amy Beach lived her whole life in musical conversation of many kinds. And, you know, that's the kind of life that I aspire to. I want to be in conversation, you know, with singers. I want to be with chamber musicians. I want to do some solo playing, you know. I write a little bit. I don't really show it to anybody. But, you know, I want to have my little tendrils everywhere. So in looking at pieces to feature while we celebrate this new instrument, for me, it's all about musical community and composers that really lived ensconced in a community where they participated too, you know, where their butts were in the chair too. You know, they weren't just back in the library writing.
Well, I love the fact that the impetus for this was that trio. I didn't know that. And
Quintet.
that's- Or quintet.
Yeah.
Quintet.
Yeah.
Why was I thinking maybe that's
The trio is very good too.
So
yeah.
I was thinking of the trio. I think I had the wrong date.
Yeah.
So folks, we'll check that and we'll try to get that right. So it's quintet. And tell us again the instrumentation of the quintet.
Yeah, so it's just a standard piano quintet. So that's 2 violins, a viola, a cello, and piano. And something that's really wonderful about this particular ensemble is that the string parts are massed enough that, you know, if they all play in unison, it's really orchestral. And there are some moments in this quintet where everyone's playing, I think, even the same note in the same register, you know, really powerfully. And so it sets up this huge dialectic between the strings and the piano, an opposition almost. But then there's also the possibility of each of the 4 of them playing in solo. And I can accompany them, and sometimes I get a solo line too. Sometimes we talk back and forth. You know, I can play, certainly I can play as if imitating 4 parts. So in the beginning of the second movement, we exchange a really heartbreaking theme, you know, before we explore the musical material together. It's wonderful. It's, you know, when we play trios, which is standard, trio is piano and violin and cello, and it's a little bit more pared down. The piano quartet, of course, is wonderful because the viola adds a richness, but there's something so orchestral about having 2 violins, viola, cello, just as it is in the orchestra. And it approaches concerto land, but it's still very much chamber music.
What's interesting to me is in reading some of the critiques of her music that were current then and even now, the word density comes up very often and talks about the density of the sound, the density of the composition, even with lesser forces. And so it's interesting you're touching on that. And how does she do that? Do you have a sense of what creates that density? And what do you think I'm meaning by density, or what?
Well, I think there's sort of a double-edged sword there, right? Because I think some of her orchestral works were criticized for having a muddy orchestration. So sometimes the density, you know, like, yeah, maybe that's not such a nice thing. But then also there's a real integrity to the counterpoint. Counterpoint is musical lines pitted against each other so that something greater than the sum of the parts arises. And she studied Bach, who is the master contrapuntist. She studied him pretty exhaustively. And I would say on a technical level, the counterpoint is really wonderful. But the harmonies are also very advanced. So it's not music that you can sort of listen to half-heartedly. You know, you're really in it with her. I think it's, I don't think that it's a disservice to her to admit that all of her pieces aren't perfect, you know? I think the quintet is a perfect piece. Certainly the piano pieces that I'm playing and the songs are wonderful, but, you know, it's a late romantic aesthetic where, you know, it can veer towards the schlocky from time to time. But I think there's also pieces that we have forgotten about from all the great composers. So I think it's a little unfair to judge her on her least successful compositions. Certainly we wouldn't do that with any of the greats, yeah? So, yeah, it's dense in the sonority. It's also dense in the intellectual aspect of, it's serious music. She's got things to say.
It doesn't surprise me that it resonates, knowing you as I do, and working with you, because I think of you as a performer and a musician who has an intellectual, certainly a very emotional, but an intellectual attachment and interest in the music that you're playing. And so I'm intrigued that that's how you've connected with her. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that, because I'm curious, just as a colleague and friend, when in your life did you start connecting that way to music? Because many times, I mean, if you started young, I assume you can tell your background, but if you started young and you're at the piano, kids don't necessarily, I mean, you're plunking down notes, right? And you're figuring out what chords are, and you're trying to play the pieces you want to play and the ones you don't want to play. And when did the switch happen? When did music become something that was real and important and who you are?
I love the question, and I don't think anybody's ever asked me before, but immediately there's like two moments that just come to me right away. And the first moment is really silly, but it was, I must have been 5 or 6, and I was really struggling with playing two hands together. It was the Christmas song Up on the Housetop. And I got this one to go down when that one went down. I muscled through it. And the intersection of the elation of like, yes, that's how it happens, and the intellectual thing of, yeah, that's like how this thing works together. Like seeing the musical machine working, the harmony and the melody together, and then the way that made me feel. That was a moment that's just etched in stone in my memory.
So made you feel physically or sonically or both?
Sonically and intellectually. I don't think I had any awareness of my body. And in fact, the second moment was very similar in that I sort of, in terms of my body, disappeared. It was a moment, there was this Methodist church near my house that was so kind to let me practice on the organ there. And I would sight read at the organ, and as an organist, you use your feet to play the bass. And I would sight read hymns from the hymn book. And there's something so wonderful about 4 parts that just come out right, And I don't know, on that day, the sunlight was coming through the stained glass a certain way, and I was just focused enough to get it right, but not so focused that I was self-conscious. And it was like I had disappeared, and all that was there was the notes and 4-part harmony, and it was just coming out right. And that, when we veered into a minor key, it was like an enormous event to me. And when we got back, right side up in the major key, the way that just moved my heart, not because I was receiving music, that came at different points, that to revel in something I was receiving, but that intellectually I could understand why this thing was moving me so. That's really, those 2 moments have been at the core of my music making since then. The intellectual pursuit and what it does to my heart.
I think that you communicate that in the way you play.
Thank you.
And you've been here, 10 years?
I think we just celebrated 8, but I'm not sure.
You've been here a good while for us.
A good while, yes.
And what impresses me constantly is that you bring your whole self here. And when you play, no matter what it is, you are really involved. And I think that's why you've developed such a loyal and appreciative following here at Shelter Rock and wherever I've seen you perform, because you do that. And I wanted to talk a little bit with you about what that's like being a musician that's in an institution that is a religious institution, and how that's different from performing. Is it different from performing? Is it different? Do you bring a different part of yourself here that you don't bring to the concert stage, or vice versa? Who are you musically when you're here to be able to stay 8 years and to continue to bring yourself with authenticity to what you're playing?
It's a huge question. And I feel like to answer that, I have to really cop to the fact that when I came here, I was just out of a graduate degree at Juilliard in collaborative piano. I went into that degree not because I wanted to become some great collaborative pianist, but really, literally, because I had a crippling anxiety of being on stage. And I thought, it actually was worse than being on stage. It was even being in the presence of another musician. To play even chamber music at that time would send me into a lot of nervous despair. And I thought, if I can just get into this degree program, since it's collaborative, which means piano plus something else all the time. I'm not solo, I'm not sitting in a practice room by myself. I'll have to confront that fear daily. And I did, and it was awful. And the project was not finished when I graduated. And so coming here and being on the hook to provide music every week to people that really listen, that continued the whole thing, okay, I need to do something. And I'll admit at the beginning, it was just don't fall down, don't be a dummy, don't screw it up. But as I began to relax enough to listen to what's said from the pulpit, as I started to get to know people in the congregation, as people sort of became real flesh and blood humans to me rather than people that I was playing for, which is a whole other thing, I thought, I've been just dead wrong about what music is for. Music is spiritual at its core, and I don't have any sense of arrival for where my spiritual journey is taking me now. I grew up in a very restrictive evangelical home. It didn't, that expression of religion didn't stay with me through coming out, through growing up. But there's been something in the back of my mind that's been saying, there's something there. There's something in the relationship to the divine, and I think in part it's what keeps me coming back to music. So if we're doing a service and the service is about something that I can say something about in music, I want to make that true from here. And of course, it's my profession, so all professions are jobs sometimes. But I've also realized that if it matters enough to me, I'm not so nervous anymore. And I can see from there the possibility of being on stage in, let's call them secular concerts, and be there actually as a spiritually grounded person with something to say. I can't put that into words yet, but if I could, maybe I wouldn't need the piano. So at this point in my life, there's a real binary between, do I believe in what I'm saying at the instrument, and am I saying it with love, or am I worried about looking good? Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm worried about looking good, I play very badly, and it's no fun for anybody. But I think that's been a great blessing of working here, and certainly an unfolding one.
It was a blessing for us, without a doubt. So it's interesting, so you say that you have this relationship with the piano now, that perhaps it would be verbal, this communication. So let's talk about your relationship with the piano, and let's talk about your relationship with this piano, and getting to know an instrument, and what you were looking for, and how we can listen to this piano, how we could appreciate this piano.
Cool.
Tell us about this piano.
Well, first of all, when we started going piano shopping together, this memory came back of when I was buying my first piano in New York. My friend, a very fine violinist, said, talking to you, you sound like a bumblebee falling in love with all the flowers. Because I would come to every rehearsal, I would say, I found this one, and it's so beautiful because of that, and I found this one, and I can't afford it. A lot of heartbreak and a lot of, like falling in love over and over and over again. So the chase is really part of the fun of getting this new instrument. But when we're looking at these instruments, these are made in factories, but by real humans. They're not machine made.
Talk about that a little bit, because I don't think people realize or understand how a piano is created.
It's an insane object because it's huge. I mean, this is 9 feet long and hundreds of pounds, but it's also incredibly delicately balanced. And each one of these 88 keys needs to be able to sense an incredibly narrow range of pressure, actually. To put the key down doesn't take much force at all. And, you see the key, it looks like it's about 1 inch thick, but it doesn't even go down all the way to what we see as the bottom. It only really goes down like less than 1 centimeter, So in that space of key descent, I like to tell my students that's your whole soul. Your soul is less than 1 centimeter thick, so you need to have all of that variation, So each key is incredibly delicately balanced. The case is constructed to focus the vibrations of the soundboard and to project it out into the room. And it's an organic material. It's wood and the frame is metal. So the way the individual qualities of this board or that board need to be mated with the body of the instrument. It's just an incredibly exact and precise science that needs to be adjusted here and there by people who know. And certainly as the performer, when you play a good one, you know.
And yet, as you say, I mean, there are specifications and everything.
Yes.
But this is made of wood.
Yes.
And so these are particular trees. This is wood that has a particular grain.
Yes.
It's put together in a very particular way.
Absolutely.
And we know that wood resonates, right?
Yes.
Because there's space in the wood. And so the piano instrument, the case, as we say, is part of what we're hearing.
Absolutely.
And I also want to say, for people who don't necessarily know, the strings are at great tension.
Yes.
So as the keys are so delicately balanced, we have the juxtaposition of a metal frame with strings that are at very, very high tension, so that when you play gently, the tension allows that sound to carry. And the case allows that sound to get into the room. So it's kind of an extraordinary balance of these great weight and tension and delicate adjustments, which makes it what it is.
And you mentioned the case being part of the instrument. I would add that the room is part of the instrument
That's just
too.
where I want to go. That's exactly where I want
And
to
this is
go.
just, it's an extraordinary room to make music in. And the piano, and this is, I think, where we got lucky. The piano loves this room. The piano sounds better here than it did in the shop. And in the shop, it sounded pretty great too.
Again, for people who aren't aware of acoustical issues, one reason this room is so good is that it's made of wood. This is made of wood. The wood actually resonates. It returns the sound to our ears in very specific ways. And for better or for worse, how people respond to the architect who created this space, he was very aware of the acoustics of this space. And this was Edward Larrabee Barnes, who is considered one of the great American architects. And I say this every once in a while. I read an article a couple of years ago, and they were listing the 10 great American architects of all time, and he was considered one. Now, functioning in the space, people have their own opinion about how it works, but I have to say, I think he created a jewel for us. And I'll just tell you a little side story. So we haven't had the piano very long, and Nathaniel wasn't here. You weren't here. I'll talk to you rather than vague. You weren't here. Christian was playing, and the instrument had been moved from where we had kind of put it and where I had put it, about 2 feet back. And I came in and I said, "I'm sorry, the piano's been moved. It has to be put back." And the person I said that to said, well, I don't understand why it has to be put back. I said, because it sounds different from this space to that. We left that. We didn't move it. Kristen came in, and she played a few notes. And I said, wait, excuse me, I want to move the piano. And I moved it to 2 feet where it should be, and she sat down and played. And she hadn't witnessed this other discussion. And she said, "Oh, my God, the room. Oh, this piano." I mean, it is that dramatic, folks. This is really what, as an organist, we were always taught, you play the room, that the instrument, it is the receptacle, it's part of the instrument. I believe that for the voice. I believe that for every instrument. And we are blessed here to have an instrument that is very responsive to the other instruments in the room. So, but I think you never really know. So until we had it in the space, we didn't really know what it was going to sound like in here.
That's correct, yeah.
But I think we both were very pleasantly surprised the way it's responded.
You asked a little bit before, and I didn't quite answer, what people can listen to in the sound. And one of the things that I'd love to call people's ears to is just the extraordinary length of the resonating sound in this instrument. The piano is essentially a percussion instrument because the strings get hit with the hammer and then the string vibrates until it doesn't anymore. And part of the job of the resonating case of the instrument is to keep that vibration going as long as possible so that it sounds as close to a singing voice as possible.
Would you say that again? Because I think people who
Absolutely.
don't understand the mechanism of piano, it's very important. How does that string, how is that different from a violin, which is a string instrument?
Yes.
Right? So
Yes.
we have two instruments that are, we hear strings, but how is it different on the piano than from the violin or cello?
So I like to think of it visually even. I find it's helpful. When you see a violinist creating a sound, their right arm, their bow arm is moving the entire time. So they're physically engaged for the whole process of making the sound. But if you imagine a harpist, they can pluck the note and even walk away and the instrument will still resonate. The piano is more similar to the harp in that respect because once you've put the key down, you can keep your foot down for the pedal or you could even put a paperweight down and the sound will keep going. It doesn't require any
But
motion.
it's struck.
It's struck.
It is a percussion instrument.
That's
what I
correct.
think is so interesting.
So
It's not
interesting.
plucked.
No.
Where you can, if you can picture a string, it's plucked and that's going to keep moving, right? Or if you've got a bow that's scraping, choosing that word purposely, scraping, because I'm studying the cello and I scrape more than I should, scraping, that's different from being struck.
Yes. So the piano is like the love child between a set of bells and a harp, I think.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
Yeah. And of course, you can't just like hit a string. Like where on the string it's hit makes a huge difference. A technician might spend hours just adjusting the strike point on the string, They're making very little change to the instrument other than the geometry of the action. And it can totally change the sound. But again, what's wonderful about the piano is the degree to which we're dealing with a sustain that in the end is never going to be infinite, And so I think it's a lovely metaphor, with that much tone, with that much sustain, what can I say? And how long do I want it to last? I think it's very poetic. And I also think it sort of makes me into a kind of magician when I play well, because if you think of making a crescendo, that means getting louder and louder and louder. Making a crescendo, you can't really do that on the piano because you're making a musical line out of notes that all get quieter and quieter and quieter. So if you think that I'm getting
Now say
louder,
that again. Why do they get quieter and quieter? Because
they're struck and the vibration uses itself up. The energy disperses after a while. So a real crescendo on the instrument is a sort of illusion that I create by listening well and hopefully responding well, and in large part the magic of the piano itself. So this piano has an incredibly beautiful long sustain. It has an incredibly round, pure tone. It can be quite powerful, but it's not, it doesn't hit, it's not clangorous, although it can be certainly very, very alive. I think this piano is one of the best I've ever played.
Wow. It's one of the best to listen to. I can say that with you playing. It's stunning here. So what are the things, you've told us a few things we can listen for in this concert, and you've told us a few things we can listen for with this piano. How should I approach this concert if I'm not a musician? I've never heard of Amy Beach. I don't go to much chamber music. What should I listen for? What should I look for? What do you think my experience could be?
Yeah, I love the question. I'm going to offer some verbal remarks in between pieces just to sort of trace the through line of her life as we listen to her music. I would say the most interesting thing to listen for when people are playing together is, what do you suppose our relationship is at any moment? And if you had a video camera on any married couple throughout the day, you would see 100 different relationships emerge. So in the course of a piece of music also, the way we relate to each other changes. And so there might be a moment where the strings are really ganging up on me, and that's fun to see. And you might even wonder, does he get out of this scrape alive, You might listen to whose line is really taking over here, or who's making the musical story go forward. I would also say that there's not a right way to listen to music, and I think part of listening to music is having your attention wander. And if you've sort of lost the plot for a little bit, to come back right then and just to hear, well, what's happening right now is always a good question. Or even, I wonder what's going to happen next. Music has a logic all its own, but it's so veiled by its materials. Notes don't give up their intentions or their little errands they have to run. They don't tell us, in words. So I just like to let music land on me and hit my heart. And, your brain might think it's happy, but your heart might think it's sad. You might see me making an angry face, but you might think the music is heartbreaking. I think the friction between different things that happen at the same time is a great reason to listen to live music.
I often say to my audiences that listening to music can be like going to an art museum. And I love going to museums, but when you're in a museum, you can focus on a painting, and then sometimes your mind goes somewhere else. That painting has taken you somewhere. And sometimes I need to sit on the bench and just not look at a painting or look at a room and see how the paintings relate to each other. And then sometimes I'm just not there. And then I get up and I look at the painting again, or maybe a different painting, or I go to a different gallery. And so I would encourage people to think of it as sampling. Like if you're a musician, you might be following every line. You might think, oh, I love that counterpoint. They're coming in at a third and a fourth. Or, even if you're a musician, you might think, that's just a lovely moment. And it reminds me of something else, that it can be just a whole personal way of experiencing the sound, the room, the people, your own life, where you are in that moment.
A moment that will never happen again.
Never happen again. Tell us about your ideas we want to make a series. We'll see what happens, but our idea is we're planning, there'll be another concert this spring, right? In June, and then there'll be 2 in the fall, and I hope this is something that resonates in this community and the larger community, and wouldn't it be wonderful if we can have a series of chamber music concerts here, and so we can experience all different types of music and all different types of composers, et cetera, et cetera. So what are you thinking about for the first... I don't know if you thought that far, but we've got 4 concerts that we're pretty much in the bag that we're going to do. You don't have to lock in, but tell us where you're taking us. What kind of journey are we going on?
Yeah. So another piece that I'd just really love to do is the Poulenc Trio for oboe and bassoon. I think it's a fabulous piece. Poulenc is a cool composer because he says exactly what he means, and he doesn't take too long to say it.
Well
and
said.
he... you always know it's Poulenc somehow. And he wrote beautiful songs.
We did the organ concerto here years ago.
Yeah. Incredible piece. Yeah, the songs are fabulous. The violin sonata is beyond. The trio is wonderful. So I'd love to sort of tell the story of his life. He lived at a really interesting time in history. And I think that something that I love listening to in Poulenc is how he can be very sarcastic, and he can have a kind of shield around him. But when he really opens his heart, you can't avoid seeing it. And that kind of, guarded, unguarded thing, I think, is really just yummy. So that's something
You're
that...
right, he opens the floodgates.
Ooh, yeah. So I'm excited to bring him into the room.
Are you thinking about that for June, or?
Tentatively, yeah. Everything is going to be dependent on when players are available. Right. But yeah, that's definitely on the short list.
That's in the process.
Yeah, another piece that's on the short list for me is the Schubert-Trout Quintet. I've never gotten to do it, and Chris Johnson, who plays in the orchestra, leads the bass section, is keen to do it, so I'm ready to do it with him. And then there are some arrangements of Mozart piano concerti that can be played with string quartet, actually.
We've done, actually, Akira and I did some of them here. So,
yeah, I think there's 3 of them. Some of the Bach can be done as well, but I think it would be cool to do a Mozart concert. Again, it won't be all Mozart. It'll be sort of Mozart and his world, and sort of even maybe composers after him, what we've all done with Mozart. So those are kind of unformed ideas, but my real intention as we listen to this instrument is also to listen to one composer and their place in the world. I think it's easy to forget that they're just normal people, you know. Robert Schumann put on his pants one leg at a time, and so do we all. And just to see, you know, who they were hanging out with and who were their friends and what accidents of history made music go the way it went. So I think certainly people can expect to see not a lecture recital per se, but you know, a concert that locates music that perhaps we've heard before, amongst other lesser heard things that maybe help us to hear in a deeper and broader way.
Great. So you'll give us an entry, perhaps, into
Yes.
a new world.
Yeah.
So I just want to end picking your brain a little bit, since we're talking about this continuum. What's your perception of how music's going to change in your lifetime?
Ooh.
With AI and with technology, have you experienced changes so far? And do you have any sense or projection about how the arts, but music in particular, will change over the next few decades?
Because music unfolds in time, and because technology's overwhelming influence on us is to shorten our attention spans, this is a subject that really fills me with a lot of uncertainty and, in darker moments, some despair, because when we can scratch our easiest itches with a 15-second video, what's the point of listening to a sonata movement that might take 15 minutes to unfold? And yet, the way life goes is that we don't get answers to the things that matter to us on the internet. We don't see the broader pattern until it's passed us by, in a sense. So, on one hand, I see that our difficulty in paying attention, which I think is getting worse, makes music a very vulnerable art. And on the other hand, I really deeply believe that music, and not just classical music, but I mean long-form, deeply considered artistic musical projects, that this is something that I cling to as a kind of life raft, and makes my life better in a time where, you know, you can pull up your cell phone and have all of the disasters of the news at your ready disposal. To turn it off and to be in a record for 60 minutes, to be at a concert for an hour, and to know again the part of myself that can listen and think and hear slowly. That's something I think that still matters, and I hope will continue to matter for a long time.
I hope it's the antidote to where we're going, and I think we say that. Nathaniel, thank you for talking with me.
Thank you, Stephen.
I can't wait for this concert.
Me too.
So folks, this is Sunday, February 8th at 1:30, right in this very space. We're going to hear the music. Again, tell us of what we're going to hear of Amy Beach.
Music of Amy Beach and some of her colleagues and even one of her teachers. And it's going to be me playing piano, Stani Dimitrova, who is our concertmaster in the summer, on violin, her friend Greta Miatianov, second violin, Mira Williams, violist, and Joe Staten is the cellist, and our own Sarah Moulton-Foe is singing some songs for soprano and piano.
Wonderful. I can't wait.
Me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.